Hello, beautiful divine souls, and welcome to another episode of Goddess of Rebirth, the podcast, your sanctuary for uncovering life's deepest truths, the real stories, and profound insights. I'm Monica, your host today, and we're setting the stage for a discussion on childbirth, ancient wisdom, and the empowerment of women. Joining us today is the incredible Bridget Supple, an advocate for empowered childbirth and the author of a compelling book, The Birth Keeper of Bethlehem. Bridget's thoughtful perspectives as a woman and a mother have revolutionized our understanding of one of humanity's most natural processes. Bridget, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I am delighted to be here today. Thank you ever so much for inviting me on.
Thank you so much for joining us. And let's get started. Tell us a little bit about you. Who's Bridget and what do you do? How is that you got into this journey?
Certainly. So I have been an antenatal teacher now for 20 years, over 20 years. And my journey started, as many people do, with the birth of my first of 4 children. I have 4 children. They are aged 23, 21, 19, and 16. And 23 years ago, when I had my first birth, like many people unfortunately do with their first birth, it was a bit of a traumatic birth with an emergency cesarean as the conclusion of it. And it set me on a journey, learning about birth, learning about what had happened. And I went on then to have 3 vaginal births. But I trained as an antenatal teacher and got into the birth world where I've worked. So I work for the National Health Service in the UK. I work for big charities. I go into prison. I work with pregnant women in prison, which is really both challenging and really rewarding work as well. I lecture on things like the infant microbiome, run workshops on really holistic birth sort of approaches, and obviously have written my book, The Birth Keeper of Bethlehem. So everything for the last 22 years really has been in the field of maternity. But it's interesting that it was that, as so many people's journey into a curiosity about this begins with a negative experience, but look at all this wonderful thing that has come out of such a rough start, really.
I am not a mother myself, and I am fascinated by this topic because precisely what you just said, what I've seen, what I've heard, and I do feel like there's something that's not right from what I'm perceiving, in the way that women are being treated at the medical institutions and the way that birth's happening nowadays. Because I'm from Mexico. When I was younger and my mom had babies, I remember that the way that she gave birth was completely different. The way that she was taken care of and the time that she took off to recover, the care for her body was completely different. And nowadays it's kind of like a whole different story. So in order to get into that conversation, Bridget, can you tell me what, in your words, is conscious empowered childbirth? What does that mean, and why is it significant for women today?
So it's really, really important, and something that I think that a lot of people aren't aware of. And your example of your mother is beautiful, because what has changed, and it has only changed in the last sort of 70 years, which isn't actually very, very much in terms of human history, is the absolute medicalization of birth. And birth is one of those incredible rites of passage. It's such an important moment in a life. It's not a medical procedure. It's actually a perfectly normal physiological process, but has so much more to it. It's transformative. It's the stepping into a different role. It's the ushering in of a new being into the world. And yet we treat it now as though a woman is poorly, that she's ill, she needs fixing, she needs saving. And the whole birth world, the whole birth system is based on a hospital model of what works for hospitals. And it looks like a hospital. So if you picture how we see birth in films and how we see birth on television, it's a mum on her back in her gown as if she is going to surgery, with people around her all gowned up and doing birth to her. Doing birth to her, isn't it? That's the thing. And that is not what birth should or could be about. Now, I will just put the thing on here that actually medical advances have saved lives. Absolutely. Sometimes babies absolutely will benefit from being born by cesarean. And isn't it marvelous that we can save babies that historically we might have lost? But in bringing in the medical model, we have also lost some of the greatest and most important things, that the wisdom of birth and this opportunity for a transformational experience. So a conscious, empowered childbirth is where you see birth as a rite of passage, where you recognize the sacredness of it, but also the transformational mode of it, and sacred with a small s. But it's bringing a new life into the world, but also the transformational program, honoring the ancient wisdom. This is something that women's bodies have done for an awfully long time. It's not new that we can do this. So suddenly, this assumption that everybody needs help to birth, that everybody is a problem, everybody needs a doctor there to save the day, frankly, is a little rude, because it suddenly puts onto women's bodies that our bodies have failed somehow, that they are faulty now and they can't do this. And that is not the truth. So when you go into an empowered childbirth, it doesn't actually mean that it is a birth that is vaginal birth with whale song playing. That empowered birth could be an empowered cesarean birth. It could be a beautiful home birth. It could be a hospital birth. But the woman is at the center. Her journey is at the center. It's a holistic, positive experience. It draws on the knowledge of her body, the knowledge of ancient wisdom about birth. It means that she is engaged in and the leader of the decisions made about her. Yeah. So we have a phrase, no decision about me without me, that was very big in the National Health Service here in the UK a couple of years ago. And it's sort of fallen off everywhere else, but it should stand in maternity. Bodily autonomy reigns supreme in maternity. And yet the system is literally designed on what works for the hospital. So we will induce you at this time, get women in, get women out. And again, with the greatest of respect to my doctor colleagues, it's missing so much. So when women can prepare for birth in a more holistic way, in a more conscious way, so thinking about the options, thinking about their role in it, planning for this event, going in empowered, knowing that you cannot control everything. You cannot control birth. You cannot say, I absolutely want this, this, and this. Sometimes things will happen that will change the course. But feeling like women are leading this and being, it's a positive experience. It's a joyful experience. It's a physical, but also connection and rite of passage moment. So there's an awful lot going on in it, but thinking very differently. So rather than women going into hospital to have birth done to them, they are laying out their table. They are bringing their team. They are bringing themselves and their bodies and a different awareness to it. Make sense?
It makes so much sense. And something that's really beautiful to me, the way that I perceive it, is that women, this is such a natural process. But now we're terrified. Like what's going to happen? How I'd probably be able to do it, but why not?
And it is a natural process, but it has always had its complications. It has always had things that can make it harder and things that can make it easier. And we had that knowledge. We had that knowledge because women always supported other women through birth. And that's the bit that has been lost and needs to be reclaimed.
I do feel like women not feeling empowered are terrified of the unknown. and not being able to control, like you say, well, what if it's part of the initiation of motherhood was precisely to feel this power within my body, that regardless of what was going to happen, I was going to be able to navigate it because the wisdom is within. I know exactly like what to do. And the network that is around me have seen birds for so long. We know what to do, how to do it. So we'll be able to manage. But right now, it's a whole different story, right?
Yep. And there's two threads going on there. One, women being terrified. And I'm not surprised, because if you've learned about birth from Hollywood and from dramas, well, it's just an emergency, isn't it? And the Hollywood birth, you can tell it's written by men. In the same way that when Hollywood men, write an upset woman, they have her at home, sipping wine from the bottle, and it's just such a cliche. It's just such a cliche. So in Hollywood, women are out angry and they're aggressive and they want all the drugs and they're not coping and everybody is useless around them and women on their back and they're made to sort of seem ugly and angry while they're pushing. No wonder people are thinking, well, I don't like the look of that. That's not for me. Thank you very much. But it's not the truth. It's not the whole truth of birth. And you're quite right. I can absolutely understand why people are terrified of it, because that is the model they have seen. Whereas your mother's generation will have had women around who, as you, and that's why I was smiling and nodding and saying yes, who've seen what good birth looks like, who knows how to support, who knows that actually historically it was quite social. So women would be surrounded by other women so that they could, because it is an initiation. And like so many initiations, it involves walking the fires of the coals on the fire, isn't it? It's sort of walking through that. It's hard, but with those people supporting you, with the knowledge that you can, it makes it very doable. And being loved and supported and cheered on, rather than stripped, put on your back in an undignified position. And I think I was saying to somebody the other day that there is a phrase in birth that people often say, leave your dignity at the door. And I get really cross about that. I'm like, that's offensive. That's abusive. It's basically grooming people to be abused. No, you do not leave your dignity at the door. And don't get me wrong, some parts of childbirth are not the most dignified experience, but that doesn't mean that you can't try to have dignity even in that moment. But it's the message that's fed to people. Leave your dignity at the door, don't worry. And I'm like, no, do not do that, because that's not okay. But it shows you how far we've come from a holistic, beautiful, supported model when a phrase like that is considered acceptable.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. But wow, I'm a little speechless. Well, wow. I heard you saying that it is not having a woman on her back to give birth. It's not helping the woman, it's helping the doctor.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. When did that change? And why is it that it's not benefiting the woman, but women don't say anything about it?
So when birth is entirely physiological, what really benefits a baby coming out of a pelvis is gravity and being upright, because the pelvis is beautifully designed for giving birth. And our coccyx, our tailbone, can actually move a little bit. So as the baby's head descends through the pelvis, that coccyx gets pushed back to make a little bit more room for the baby. And it's fairly obvious that it's easier for something to come down if you are upright than if you are lying on your back. The most interesting thing, Monica, is that when you look at women laboring instinctively, so whether they're in a birth center or in a home birth, women don't lie down. The very start of labor, when they think, I'm not sure if this is it, they might go and have a little bit of a nap. But as soon as labor gets going, wherever you go in the world, whether it's somebody's fifth baby or their first, they lean over and they sway. It's like a dance that we don't have to teach women. It's innate in their body to do this movement. And that's beautiful because it's moving the pelvis. And as you move the pelvis, the baby's head is coming down. As labor gets more intense, women who are acting instinctively will quite often get lower and lower. They'll get onto all fours. They get close to the ground. They go down and down and down onto the ground. So in previous times, if you were the midwife, if you were watching the baby's descent, if you were ready to welcome that baby into the world, to be the ones to catch them, you had to be underneath the woman. You had to be lower than her bottom. So there's a amazing midwife who works in Indonesia, Robin Lim, and I've seen her sort of pictures of her and her working where women are on all fours and she's literally lying on the floor underneath the woman's bottom, ready, watching and checking and ready just with her hands to make sure that that baby is caught as they come out. Now, when birth started to be medicalized, and that's another story. That's a complete power grab. But many male doctors, when they came in, they were not prepared to be on the floor underneath a woman's bottom. That was not going to happen. So if mum lay on the bed, it was easier for them to see. It actually makes it harder for the baby because they've now got to go round a corner and up a hill as opposed to straight down, and the space is smaller, and it makes it much harder for the woman who is birthing that baby because they've got to have all the extra effort of pushing that baby around a corner and up a hill. So not better for babies, not better for women, just easier for the doctor. And that's how we ended up on our backs. And when you tell women that, they get a bit cross. They're like, hang on a second. We've been tricked. We have literally been tricked. And it's the norm. And hospital rooms, you walk in and the bed's in the middle, and the expectation is that you will get in and labor on. And it's actually going to make your labor harder work, slow it down, and make it more painful.
I think it's incredible that women like me, we have no idea, and not only me, but like my friends in my circle, my community. How come we didn't know? Like it's
Because of this drip feeding all your life of these images of women giving birth on their back. So women arrive in hospital and they get into bed because that's what they think you're supposed to do. But I'm afraid to say, Monica, now I've told you, you will never be able to see a woman laboring on her back again in a film. But that's something in your head going, well, that's harder work. That baby's got to go round the corner and uphill.
That's why I'm so happy you're here. Because like we're coming back to remembering who we are and what is natural, what is wise, and how to protect our bodies, how to really, this is such an important conversation.
It is. And we've seen it for things like periods, haven't we? We've seen it, that reclaiming of knowledge and the reintroduction of rituals around girls starting their menses and all of this sort of thing. And definitely for menopause. Menopause is suddenly on the table for discussion in Britain in a way that it absolutely hasn't been in my lifetime. And I'm in my mid-50s, so it's really interesting to see how it's just suddenly people are talking about it. It's a widespread knowledge. And I think that respect and that knowledge and that wisdom really needs to come back to birth, because the medical model is not working. It is working in the sense that some babies are doing better than we would have lost historically, but the rates of maternal and infant mortality have kind of plateaued. It's not gone entirely. It's sort of stopped, and women are being traumatized. There's incredible numbers of women, say in Australia, for example, who are reporting birth trauma and choice. And taking that decision making away from them. There's a really interesting statistic out of Brazil where I believe that 90% of babies are born by cesarean, but 85% of women would like to have a vaginal birth. So how does that marry? 90% born by cesarean, but if you ask women what they want, they actually want to have a vaginal birth. So it's not anywhere in particular. It's not just Britain. It's not China. It's not everywhere. We see this pattern of the stripping of knowledge and power. And I don't think it's an accident, because when women have a good birth, it's a transformative experience. they are powerful. They go into motherhood just feeling their strength. It is a raw journey. It is a hard journey. It is a stripping off of all of the layers. You have to let go and surrender in childbirth to be able to go through it. So it's a real trial by fire. And historically, women were supported through that by other women who'd done it. It was a very sociable event. You would have been to one before, you would know what to expect, and there would be great honoring of women afterwards. Did you from Mexico? I believe that it used to be the tradition to give women, if they died in childbirth, they had a full warrior burial because it was considered the same honor as having died in battle. It was that important a quest almost, yeah, if that makes sense. And so all around the world we see, in some ways, in some parts of Mexico, I believe that there's much more holding on to the traditions, the work with rebozo, the repositionings of babies, some of the things. But this is a universal change in a very short period of history.
This is amazing. It is amazing to remember. So, how can expectant mothers prepare themselves mentally and spiritually for a conscious childbirth experience? According to your experience, what have you seen? What's some advice that can help?
Super. So really thinking about where you get your information from, that's the key. So if you have been learning from Hollywood and dramas about birth, we need to look at that and almost say, okay, so this is the cultural model, but there is another way. So learning about physiological birth, learning about what's normal and what your body is actually capable of doing is huge, and what the process should look like. But also learning about the things that can help, learning about the hormones that make labor go and stop, learning about massage, learning about the use of water in labor. All of these things are helpful. Now, if one thing worked for all women, they'd all do the same thing. So there are different ways of accessing this information. So some people might do hypnobirthing, especially people who've got a lot of anxieties and fears. That's a beautiful way of learning to relax if you're not very good at it, and changing core beliefs. So if you've got very firm, so the beautiful way to describe how hypnobirthing works is that if you think of an iceberg, so we see the tip above the water, yes? And that's your critical thinking brain. So you think that all your decisions are made up there, but they're not. Everything we see over the water is held in place, supported, and can be tipped or influenced by the enormous weight underneath. And the weight underneath is every bit of your childhood, your adulthood, every film you've seen about birth, every story your friend has told you. All of those bits make what's underneath. And what we don't realize is how much influence they have on that top bit, the bit we see above the water. So when you are deeply relaxed, we get people into a very deep relaxed state, and we can go under the waterline and try and change some of those core beliefs. Does that make sense? So that's one way. So that can help. Now, some women are much more physical, and I think for a lot of women, they can feel a dissociation from their body. They can feel a little bit separated. Some people haven't always had a positive relationship with their body. And for them, things like pregnancy yoga can be fantastic because they learn to trust their body, to work with their body, to understand their body, to know its limits, to feel its strength, to connect with their body. And it is quite relaxing, possibly not when you're in some of the poses and you try not to fall over, but the whole experience is very relaxing. So pregnancy yoga is a beautiful thing to do. It tends to be, it's so much gentler than, you know, your full on hardcore. And it's very much about relaxing and connecting with the baby. So that can work for some people. We have really good evidence that both mindfulness and meditation can work as well. There's quite a big movement in terms of things like drumming. So during labor, so using shamanic drums, both in labor but also in pregnancy. So Jane Hardwick Collins talks about this. Sophie Messenger's writing a lovely book on it. And using that to take women on journeys to connect with their babies and connect to their bodies. So there are so many different ways of doing this. But I really want you women to think about where they're getting their messages from. There are beautiful sources of good information about how to prepare for it. And as I say, we all respond differently. There are things that will work better for some of us than others. So finding the one that sits best with you. I think that connecting with your baby during pregnancy as well. And that has amazing benefits. So I know that for some people it can be a little bit strange when they first feel something move inside them, but talking to the baby, trying to connect with the baby mentally, sending them messages. If you're a little stressed, it's okay, baby. It's just, I'm a bit worried about something, but we will be fine. Because we do see from a sort of a brain development point of view that if women connect with their babies in pregnancy, it really helps that bonding, that attachment, and that well-being after the birth as well. So not only is it good for the birth and for baby, but actually it has really positive long-term impacts as well. Yeah. And I think it's, there's such a breadth of offerings now for women in pregnancy to find the thing that works for them.
Right. How beautiful. And now that you're mentioning these different practices, different ways, let's talk a little bit about ancient wisdom and how can we put back together these pieces of ancient knowledge that we have regarding childbirth, and how can we integrate those into our modern society? Because I'm pretty sure that there's challenge in there, right? Into blending the traditional and the modern. Is it possible? And what are your thoughts about that?
Super. So there is this incredible knowledge across the world, in all different cultures, about supporting pregnancy. Now, some countries have held on to it better and some have lost it. So in Britain, ours largely got wiped out during the witch hunts. So the 15th century, where there was a document, the Witch Hunter's Guide, that actually said that you could be, if you healed, if women used herbs to heal, that was the work of the devil and you should be put to death. You should be burnt alive for healing somebody. I mean, you can't even begin to put your head around that. So a huge amount of the women who were put to death were midwives, were herbalists, were people who had the knowledge of how to use food as medicine, herbs as medicine, and all of those sorts of things. Now, many countries have kept this. They did not go through what Britain and parts of Europe went through in that stage. So every culture has it. Every culture has this wisdom. For example, practices after birth, like wrapping bellies. So in Mexico, it's using a rebozo to hold tight. You see it across Asia, but it's very much that beautiful woven wrap, isn't it, where it sort of weaves together. But there's evidence of it happening in England, in France, in the Tudor ages. So it seems that every country at some point in history has a practice of wrapping women after birth. So even if there isn't a current one where you are now, that doesn't mean to say that it wasn't there. It wasn't there. It's been lost. So all of these things we need to bring back, a knowledge about using herbs and using, say, essential oils. So the really obvious ones are things like lavender and mandarin. There are studies that show that they are good at reducing the perception of pain. So women have always used things like that in childbirth. But going back to that preparation in pregnancy, so thinking about a more holistic and a more blended sort of model of care, as you say. So that isn't to say that you don't see your midwife. It's very important that she takes, dips your urine and checks out for some conditions that could be problematic, that she listens to your baby's heartbeat and monitors your blood pressure. All brilliant. But looking after yourself in pregnancy. I think one of the most significant things that I've noticed in my lifetime is how pregnant women are treated. So when I was a child, women, when they were pregnant, were respected, but kind of treated as a little bit special, left alone. You're pregnant and everything is, they were just protected. And you see it in lots of parts of the world that pregnant women are not supposed to deal with death. They are not supposed to be told bad news. They're not to have, if it's called bad spirits, crossing their path. But lots and lots of protection around pregnancy. Modern women meant to be pregnant, be fabulous, work right up until you give birth, Instagram ready at any moment, and literally not drop a beat. And it's an incredible amount of stress to put on somebody when they are pregnant and possibly not feeling terribly well and a little bit swollen. So, one, going back to protecting pregnancy, I think is really important where it needs. Now, some women will be absolutely fine with anything, but as a society, to be a little bit more understanding of this transformation that is taking place, for women to access the herbs, the food as medicine, going back to that. And it is very good that things like taking multivitamins have really helped, pregnancy vitamins rather. So things like folic acid do make an incredible difference in terms of health. But you can get so much from food better from your food. All right. So it's not necessarily as an instead of, but going to food as medicine, eating that wide variety of food. And I always go back to food because I'm big on the microbiome. I'm very big on making sure that your gut bacteria is super, super healthy. But thinking about what we eat, thinking about, those practices of learning to relax, thinking about your breathing, all of these things. So what you would see in ancient times was there would be the birth keeper or the midwife of the village, and they would tend to see women all the way through the pregnancy. So they would build a relationship with them. They would, how are you doing? What's going on? They would help reposition babies if they were in an awkward position. But they also knew what was going on in that woman's life. So if she was stressed, she had somebody to support her. And reducing stress in pregnancy is incredibly important for a variety of reasons. The well-being of babies, developing of their brain, the mother itself, we want them being, but having that person who was there to defend and support and look after you. In the old days, we didn't have a language necessarily like anemia, but we would know that women in pregnancy often got very weak and were feeling a bit sort of low on energy, and they would know the foods that would increase what we now know is increase your iron, but they would know the foods to give. So again, women now thinking about self-care, thinking about looking after yourself, eating well, taking time to do the nice things, taking time to honor this incredible physical change that is going on, this transition, because technically you're a mother as soon as you're pregnant, really, aren't you? You know what I mean? It's once that baby starts growing, people don't feel like it very often until their first baby is born. But helping them adjust to this changing role and all of these sorts of things. And this is what having your dedicated person in the town, in the village, in the community would have been brilliant at. So we can work towards bringing that back, bringing back that support, getting women to tell positive stories to women who are pregnant, as opposed to the horror stories that we see on TV, thinking about food, thinking about lightening some of the stress loads off women while they go through this journey. It's a tiny period in a massive life. Yes. So a couple of months of care is no big ask, really, is it?
And also, I feel like we have devalued things like our intuition and just being observant of what's happening in my body, because we rely too much on what the doctor's saying but what are the results and my tests and all of that. But I don't really tune in to hear, but what is my body saying? What is there any sort of like, like my intuition is telling me this, but okay, the doctor said that it's all right, that everything's okay, so it should be okay.
And women's intuition in pregnancy and labor is, you need to pay attention to that. When you're saying something isn't right, something is usually not right. You pay attention to that. And you're quite right, connecting to bodies. So often, if we have backache or something like that, there is a pill to be taken for that, rather than thinking, why? What's causing this? What is it about what I'm doing, how I'm sitting, is it just because if you sit for a long period of time on your phone and you're slightly hunched, of course you're going to get backache. Yeah, but rather than thinking, okay, where is it, and what's the cause of that? You can take a pill or go and see somebody. And don't get me wrong, I'm a massive fan of going for body work if I need it. But there's also the element of one step back. Why does my back hurt? And women have not been brought up in a society that says, don't put up with this. Let's go to the root cause. It's always fix it, just fix it, rather than hang on a second. Why are we feeling like this? So connection to your body, trusting your body. And that's a huge thing for a lot of women. A lot of women don't trust their body. And pregnancy can be a wonderful opportunity to make that connection, to learn to love your body. It's I think it's now I never get her name the right way around. Wrote Run with Women Who Run with the Wolves. Clarissa Pinkoe Estes, is that right? But she's written a lovely book about your body being your constant companion. Of all the people who are with you across your lifetime, your body is there for you. It loves you. It's part of you. It works hard for you. It turns up every single day. And yet we put stuff in it that we shouldn't. We don't exercise it enough. We don't love it. We don't adore it for how hard it tries. And I think that when you grow another human in you, there is a beautiful opportunity for women to heal maybe some difficulties that they've had with their body, to thank their body for this literally incredible thing that it is doing and the strength and the power that it shows. And that's why circles of supportive women can be so helpful, because they will say, but look at how beautiful your body is. Look at how incredible it is. Look at what it is doing, and it has done.
That was very profound. And I'm grateful that you shared that, because what I'm getting right now is women's not only giving birth to a baby, but she's also giving birth to herself. Like she's recovering, she's reclaiming, she's becoming a new person entirely.
Yeah.
Physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And this probably it's the physicality of it, like how the body expands, because technically everything is expanding. Your spirit's expanding, your responsibilities, your power. And so that's something that we need to remember.
We do. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. And I think that there is, when women are given the space to and given the support to, there is a spiritual transformation as well. There is an opening up. There is a changing of the focus. Now, some women, if their lives are very stressful, if they are very, held down by the oppression of violence or of worry or of poverty or of stress, they may not have the opportunity to experience the fullness of this. But there is something quite remarkable about growing another human, literally bringing another human soul into the world through yourself, about this surrender to the change in your body, the power of connection, and this incredible spiritual experience, this rite of passage, this moment that is so important. And I keep going back to it because I think it is important to say, I don't think it is an accident that all of this beautiful transformational opportunity has been sat on, stripped away, put in a corner. Don't look at that. For goodness sake, don't look over there. We don't want you to see that. Because when women have a great pregnancy and a great birth, particularly a great birth, they feel empowered, they feel strong. And you need that strength going into parenthood, because babies are absolutely gorgeous, but it's a very long commitment with them. And it's full on. So actually, we want strong parents. We want healthy, empowered, really engaged and committed parents. And women have this strength that they come out of it. And I never think it's an accident when that's been taken away in some way to keep women just underneath.
Now, imagine all the money that we spend trying to fix our body. Because, like, how do I get back to my older shape? How do I fix now these marks, stretch marks, and and the surgeries and all of that money? Imagine if we we take down those industries and the businesses are
Yeah.
making us fight against our body and the beauty of it.
It's your constant companion. It's your friend. It's your everything. It's the container to the beauty of the soul that is you. Honoring it and loving it. And it does change sometimes during pregnancy. Some women, you snap back, no problem. Most of it changes. And again, I think of it like somebody who has done this incredible quest, this incredible journey. And my body is stronger and different, but that's okay. It shows the journey that I have been on. I have had 4 children. My body does not look the same as it did before, but I am so proud of my body for producing these 4 incredible, incredible beings. Yeah. I look at them sometimes, I think I made you. I made them. They're ace.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Bridget, let's talk a little bit about your book.
Oh, yes.
Tell us, what inspired you to write The Birth Keeper of Bethlehem? And tell us a bit about the story. What is it about?
So The Birth Keeper of Bethlehem is the story of Salome. And Salome is the midwife who was there when Mary gives birth to Jesus. Now, a lot of your audience will be sitting there thinking, what? Sorry? I've never heard of one of those. Yeah, I know there was a donkey. I think there was definitely, a stable, but at a star. I've heard a king, but no midwife. And this is the story that we have been told, isn't it? It's quite wherever you are in the world, there is a story of we know about Jesus, and we know a lot of people will have heard of the birth story. But if you think about it, the story says that they made it to Bethlehem. And if Mary and Jesus made it to Bethlehem, and the story says that they did, there is absolutely no way that a Jewish man would have been present at the birth. Because once women go into labor in the Jewish tradition, men need to be separate. This is, it's a woman's space. To be fair, if they'd given birth on the road and it was an emergency, a man can attend. But if they made it to the town, and so the Birth Keeper of Bethlehem is the story of Mary's midwife, Salome. So it's not a story about Jesus. It's a story about birth. It's a story about midwifery and how she supports the women of the village and the births that she attends. And there is a story in there that we recognize really well, and their connection with the family through the years. But I wanted to write a love letter to birth and midwifery. And that's what it is. It's my my love letter to it. The extraordinary transformational power, the wisdom, the rituals, all of the beautiful things that we've lost, all of the different practices that were normal, the knowledge that was held. So Salome, who is the midwife, her mother was a midwife and her grandmother before her. And I know a number of beautifully practicing midwives who, again, their mothers and their grandmothers have been. And throughout history, you would very often find that the women in the village who did the births also did the death. So they would lay out the bodies and they would also be there to greet them. And the herbalists and the healers and all of these sorts of things where people would go for help. So the book is about, in the same ways that people remember the red tent, and it's the story of the women written out of the Bible that we don't know, and the connection between them. It's like that. It's the story that you don't hear about the women there, their friendships, their relationships, their journeys. And I wrote the book I wanted to read. I like to read a book. I like to learn things while I'm reading it. It's my favorite way to discover stuff. And I tend to remember more about things like herbs that I've read about if I've read them in a story than if I've read them in a technical text. So I can remember how they used it in the story. I remember what it was used for much better than I remember it from a textbook. So I wrote all of that in. I wrote in rituals and herbs and journey. But it's also, I hope, a story that makes us realize how women were there at the beginning and the end, how they were written out of the story. Because this is the amazing thing about it. I had the idea of this book longer than I care to admit, and how long it took me to actually get around to writing it. But I will throw up that I have 4 children, and they were somewhat of a distraction. Love them, so it took me a little while. But I'd been thinking about Salome because the story is, I was looking at the setup of a nativity at Christmas. We often, you see the little stable with Mary and the baby Jesus in a crib and all this. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, well, that's not right. Because there's no way that a man would have been present. There would have been a midwife. And literally, as I had that thought, Salome popped into my head, fully formed. It was like she sat down next to me and introduced herself to me. I said, well, hello. And I knew who she was, and I knew what she was like, and I knew everything about her. And I loved this thought. So a bit later on, I think when the kids had gone to bed, I went on and I had a little Google, and it turned out that there was a midwife at the birth, and her name was Salome. At which point, the hairs on my back of my neck have just gone up. Now, in fairness, I might have known it somewhere in something I've read somewhere. There might have been a nugget of information just sitting there waiting to pop out, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like she literally sat down next to me and said, hello, you're going to tell my story. I was like, hello, okay. And what really, really made my heart sing. So it took me a little while to finally get this book out. And the month that I put it out, they found her tomb. They found her tomb. And it turns out that she was actually quite an important person in early Christianity. She was venerated. So they found these little lamps in the same way that people go to church or they go to temple and they light a candle, for prayer. So people would hire lamps, or they would have lamps, and they would go in and they would pray to Salome, because Salome actually was quite important. But for me, the fact that say after 2,000 years, it coincides with me telling her story, me saying, this is her. And then they found her. And I was just beyond that. So excited. Isn't that just incredible? Isn't that?
That's wow.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Isn't that amazing? 2,000 years, we didn't know her name. We didn't really know anything about her. And then literally the month I published my book, they find it. I have so got to go. And I want to be in a place where I can have that direct connection to her.
So to all the people in the audience, to whoever this podcast is gonna reach, to please buy the book. Or if you like audiobooks and listen to the book, wow.
Yeah, the audiobook is just about to come out. It's published by a beautiful woman-based publishers, Womancraft Publishing, but you can get it wherever you are in the world from your booksellers or Amazon or wherever it is you buy them from. And I think what's really interesting is, while it is about birth and midwifery, a lot of people who have not had children have loved it. They've been really moved by it.
I need to make another podcast episode just of me telling like how incredible it is. The story, like everything that you're sharing, because it's a story that is taking you back to the scene. You feel like you're part of it.
Yeah.
That's it's so good. It's so good.
Wonderful.
Tell me about this. This is going to be my last question for you, but what insights did you gain while writing your book about womanhood?
So a lot of the births that are in there reflected the births that I have attended and been at, because while I am an antenatal teacher, I have been at a lot of births, and a lot of the wisdom is stuff that we know. But I also did a lot of research because I'm not Jewish, so I had to really look into all of the practices. And what really struck me was how sacred ritual birth was considered, and how so important so many rituals were around birth. Oiling and salting of the baby after they were born, the massage of the mother and the wrapping of the womb. And again, while knowing that we'd lost some of these traditions, it really just spoke to my heart, this care that was taken care of Mary after she would have given birth, and all the women in Bethlehem. So you still see it in parts of the world where women are looked after for between 10 and 40 days after the baby is born. And it really struck me what a difference it makes to have that continuity of care all the way through the pregnancy, knowing your midwife, knowing them there. And there are some medical models in around the world where women will maybe know their doctor all the way through, their gynecologist, their obstetrician all the way through. But that's a very different relationship to go into the kind of and it may be woman, but the father figure telling you that everything is okay, rather than being with woman, are you stressed? Here, eat this community. So the insights that I had were just really about these beautiful, caring customs and traditions. And it's made me a very strong advocate to try and get back that looking after women after the birth, that making sure that she isn't going home and having to do the cooking and the cleaning and the shopping and worrying about the mental load of have all these things been done, but taking care of new mothers, practicing these honoring of the womb by doing massage and wrapping in cloths and binding that belly back up again to say thank you to it for working so hard. And I got to learn lots and lots and lots about different herbs and spices, which was just a joy because honestly, I do actually really like that kind of thing. And placentas, thinking about rituals around placentas and what we do with those and how everything looks. And I think when I was maybe a lot younger, I didn't really I like a good ritual, like a thing. But as I get older, and when I see for these important rites of passage, like menses, like menopause, like birth, these beautiful honoring rituals are really, really important. And I think that's the thing that really came up for me after writing it, was how much we've lost, but also how much we can get back. They're there. They're sitting there. Some cultures are still doing them all around the world. And I think people worry a lot about cultural appropriation, and quite rightly too, there is respect. But I think what is really interesting is it appears that every culture has done this. So wherever you are, you're finding what your grandmothers and great grandmothers and your ancestors did and pulling that back forward. And I think that that's also very important for people to know, that there doesn't seem to have been a culture where at some point in history women were not looked after for the 10 and 40 days. So just because it's gone now doesn't mean that it wasn't normal, if that makes sense. So I want to have that don't be afraid to reclaim what was in your history just because it got wiped out.
Yeah. And like you said at the beginning, where are you sourcing your information from? Because at least here in China, women are still getting 40 days of complete rest. Like it gets really, really wild here. And I say wild because I have never seen it before in my own culture. I didn't see it this way, but they don't take showers. They don't brush their teeth, I think. They don't wear any makeup. They don't do any physical activity for 40 days. Is complete rest.
Yeah.
And not, the first time I heard that, I'm like, they don't take showers, what? But no, like not, and that was part of like when I started remembering what my mom did when she gave birth to my brother. She was totally taken care of for 40 days. No, and something that I remember really clearly is that my grandma was always very concerned about the temperature of the body.
Yes,
How to,
warming.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's what you see in China is it's not cold. There's no cold water, your hat's on, your socks on, everything is warm. And I think what's really interesting is that every culture has warming practices after birth. So nowhere historically cools women down. So it's all about whether it's spicy warming food or hot food, but warming. Mexico, for example, there's a fantastic indigenous Mexican midwife who talks about doing mother roasting, where they would light a fire in the room as if it's not warm enough. Yeah, but this, I'm like, really? You need to get warmer? but fascinating that it's always warming. So the Chinese sitting the month is really, really big on no cold at all. But I think it's utterly fascinating that everywhere everywhere warms mothers. And that's what I mean by these shared practices, the shared practice of belly massage, the shared practice of wrapping, literally across Europe, South America, Asia. We see it all over the world. Warming foods, and care, rest in the early days.
Yeah, totally. Rest, which is
Yeah.
something that nowadays we're not good at resting, and mostly because we're also kind of, I this is my perception, but we women and all people in general are valued more because of their productivity. And so how can you be productive if you're resting? How can you have value and add something to society when you're doing nothing? But
There's
that's another.
a lovely phrase that is rest is not idleness, which I really love. Rest is not idleness. Rest is really important. Rest is valuing yourself, replenishing so you can go back into the world. You are not productive when you are exhausted, when you are stressed to the eyeballs, and when you are drained. The creativity isn't there, the compassion isn't there, the joy in creation isn't there. So rest is an important part, and it it's a much used phrase, and it's a little obvious, but I think we often forget that you are supposed to work to live, not the other way around. And rest can be beautiful. Rest can be reading and learning and doing all sorts of interesting things while you are doing it, which means that you bring more to everything you do.
I love nature. I'm always outside. I'm always observing the trees and talking to the flowers, and I love nature. Anyways, but I was thinking the other day about the trees because they're, so green and beautiful. But I've been observing them since winter, and I'm very fascinated about their transformation. And I have videos of winter time when they were like
Resting.
right. And a thought that came for me was, even when that tree was resting, like you said, that tree was still contributing to the oxygen and the processes of the planet. It was still the simple presence of that tree in there was so valuable for simply being what it is, a tree. It was not because of the flowers, if it looked beautiful, if it didn't, if it had green or whatever. It was because it was just there. And same for a woman, the power, the influence that the presence of that woman has in her circle, in her community, in her family, simply for being her, for being there without doing anything. It's
Beautiful.
it's important. It's crucial. So
Beautifully put, Monica, because that tree is holding the soil. The roots are holding the soil so the soil doesn't wash away. The tree is providing habitat for insects, which are feeding birds, and for animals. So even if the tree is not doing, it is holding the earth solid so it doesn't wash away. We see so much erosion, don't we? Where you take the trees down, the soil washes away, and all sorts of problems come from that. Landscapes change, and not in a positive way. They are providing habitat, they are providing strength, they are providing shelter for creatures. So it looks like they are doing nothing, but they are there. And I like you, I am always out in nature, and it's where I go to refill and replenish. And cyclical nature, respecting the fact that it goes and everything rests, and then that amazing rebirth and beauty again. So I love the trees. I mean, they're doing it now. They've gone from nothing to the buds, and then suddenly you go back, and 2 days later you're in the woods, and you have a canopy again, which is quite remarkable. And I think that respecting the season, respecting the cycle, respecting all of this is a wisdom that women know. We know it from our periods. We know the cycle of the periods. Most women I know are trackers, love the moon, so we're all like, have you seen the moon today? And so whether that's nature or moons or tides or everything, we are drawn to cycles and we learn from cycles. There are our lessons.
right. One last thought that is coming for me is about, and I'm gonna close like the full circle. A woman who feels the need just right after giving birth to go back to work or their routine, their body shape, the workout, like the social. I do feel like that's the difference that I've noticed between my mom giving birth and resting and having all this care. and my sister-in-law giving birth, when she was like, no, I have to go back to work. Like, how do I fix this? And how do I like it? It was a very, it was this need to, I need to go back to who I was before.
Yeah.
And the last thing that's coming for me is just from the physical sense of it, your bones are not in the same position that they were before. How do we force, or how do we even allow women to go back to work when their bones are not in the right place?
And it depends where you are in the world. So in the UK, most women will have the better part of a year paid for off work. But in America, it strikes me as very staggering, really, that it is apparently illegal to separate a puppy from its mother before the puppy is 8 weeks old. All right, that's illegal. But women are back at work after 2 weeks, which is, you just think, I'm sorry, pardon? Really? Can you not see that this is not okay? So a couple of things to speak to that. I think that if nobody has ever modeled to you that rest and this time and productivity comes in different ways, looking after yourself to look after your family and your baby is a beautiful role. But we need to talk to women about the transition to motherhood. So I do in my classes, I talk about the change, I talk about identity, but I also want to remind women that they've done it before. You changed from a girl to a teenager, from a teenager to a woman. And yes, it's a bit strange. And yes, sometimes you want to be where you were, or you can't wait to be past this bit and to the next bit, which seems much easier. And what we do know is that every bit has its joys and every bit has its challenges. But talking about identity, and I would always say this, when I teach classes, I never ask what people do. Occasionally, if I'm teaching about brain development, a teacher's a bit of a godsend to me. If I've got a primary school teacher in, I'm like, oh, brilliant, let me ask you about school readiness, because I know that they will prove a point for me. But I never ask what people do, because you're much more than the job that you do. Because of my role across the hospital and of all the stuff I do, I teach and come into contact with literally, thousands of couples every year, a lot. And I meet people who are very important and very high up in their business, and CEOs, and terribly, terribly important people. But sometimes they're dull, or they're bigoted, or they're really close-minded. And I also work with some of the most humble people who do really, basic jobs, or really what you would think of as not being great social jobs, but they're interesting and they're political and they have, great convictions, and they try and they are doing their bit. So trying to get over to women, I think, that you are much more than the thing that you do and the image that you present. Who are you? And you have an opportunity in motherhood when everything is stripped away and you're not just defined by the role that you do. Who are you? And what are you like? And are you interesting? And if not, this is your opportunity. Yes? So I think it's really important that we talk about this to women as they go into it. I do. And it's really interesting what it throws up for people, because they've never thought of it that way.
This is such a beautiful conversation. Bridget, where can people find you if they are interested in your classes or to know about your work and your book?
Instagram is really great. Head over to Instagram, Birthkeeper of Bethlehem. Facebook, Birthkeeper of Bethlehem. I've got a website. Guess what that's called? The birthkeeperofbethlehem.com. The theme as a theme. And I'm always delighted to connect with people and engage with them about their journeys or what they thought about the book and so forth.
And what a pleasure to have this conversation with you and to hear all this wisdom and your experience writing that book. So profound, so beautiful, so divine. And I do feel like we all have that opportunity. Having someone who lived 2,000 years ago choosing you to tell her story. Wow. So powerful.
Everybody will know her name. Everybody will know who she was.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like, thanks to you taking all of our responsibility. Now we can access that. That's mm, such a legacy. What an honor to have you here with me talking about beautiful work. And to our audience, please do not miss this great opportunity to be part of the legacy of Bridget Suplet and Harvard community, her work, and definitely to read this amazing book and to get to know Salome a little bit more and better. As we draw today's conversation to a close, I want to extend my deepest thanks to Bridget for joining us and sharing such profound insights on empowered childbirth and the integration of ancient wisdom into our lives. What a story! And hearing about someone with such expertise and wisdom is not only enlightening, but it's inspiring. And it's definitely starting this wave of transformation among us. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Bridget, for joining us today.
Thank,
And I would love to have you back anytime you want.
thank you so much, Amy. It has been an absolute joy to speak to you today about all of these things, really. And your wisdom and your insight has just been wonderful. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you to all our listeners. And we hope to see you again next week, tuning in to a different conversation. You have a wonderful week.